Okay, I got cut off a little bit in my other video, so I'm creating a video that continues off of the one um, I was in the middle of recording when going through this stuff here. But yeah, the first sentence, I was going over the construction of your first sentence, what it focused on, two basic ways to do it. Then in the next sentence, that is where you're going to provide textual evidence from the arguments to as initial backup for the first sentence that you make, the claim that you make in your first sentence. So in a way, you could think of each of these paragraphs as an argument. The first statement is saying that, something that there's a comparison or that there's a difference. Then you offer evidence as part of your reasoning in support of the first sentence in your paragraph that there is a similarity or a difference. If you're going to say there's a similarity or difference, well, you're talking about two things, right? When we talk about similarities, we're talking about what's the same or similar between two or more things. And then if we're talking about differences, then we're talking about what's not alike. You need at least two things to talk about how something's not like something else. So you have to provide evidence from each text to do that. So the next part of your paragraph will focus on presenting that. So you can say things like, so you make your claim like, I see a similarity, blah, blah, blah. Then you say, we see this when I say, comma, then quote a statement. Okay, so make sure that you remember the lessons on argument. Remember, I went over the definition for argument, and then I even went into a little bit of detail about how we're using the word statement. So you might want to find your notes. Remember that there can be more than one statement in an argument, and it's really important to take note of that because some of your peers might have two or three statements in a single sentence, and I don't want you to give me two or three statements as part of your evidence. I want you to focus on the most important, compelling, relevant piece of evidence, and that means focusing on a particular statement. So be very careful about that. Make sure you're using the word statement and applying what I just said in the way that I defined it in the initial argument lesson. So you'll have to provide textual evidence. And so another mistake that students make sometimes is they try to introduce both quotes in the same sentence. And for a lot of students, this is difficult to achieve. Some students are still working on their command of English writing mechanics and introductory clauses. And so they kind of mess up with the syntax in terms of how you introduce two quotes in one sentence. So what I recommend is that you have a second sentence that introduces a quoted statement from yourself or your peer, period. Then start yet a third sentence that introduces your evidence in the form of a quote from yourself or your peer, right? So as long as you have textual evidence from both of your responses in the form of a statement that you quote, you'll be good. Keep in mind that when you're doing this part right here, when you're doing step 3B, you are not paraphrasing. You are providing direct textual evidence. What did you actually say? What did your peer actually say? You can go on to talk about what's implied if that's going to help you make your case, but you need to start with what was actually said. Okay, so then most of the work occurs at this step right here. So let me move this around. Magic. We're at step 3C. This is where most of the discussion happens. One thing I want you to know is that if you do only step 1 and 2 and step 3A, you're going to get hardly any points. Like, I won't even use a rubric. I'm not trying to be mean, but you haven't done the most difficult work. You haven't done the most important work. Step 3B, you get there, you're going to get some points, but again, you won't pass the assignment, and I still won't use the rubric. Qualifying for rubric-based grading requires that you get this part done, okay? So that you get all of the parts done, especially this part. So step 3C. Now, I'll notice that I say this means that you should quote an entire statement or significant portion of a statement from each response, that is from each argument, when claiming your responses compare or contrast in some way. So again, you're comparing when you find similarities or differences. So I apologize if that confuses you. I should have said responses are similar or different in some way, alike or not alike. And by the way, notice that when I'm saying alike or not alike, I'm not using it in the sense of saying I like what you said or dislike what you said. No, because that would mean that you're making the mistake that I warned you against earlier, where it's not about liking, telling somebody you like or dislike what they said. I shouldn't see any language. Here, when I'm saying, notice what I'm saying, not like, but alike. In other words, there's something that's the same or similar. Dislike, in other words, there's something that's not the same, that's not similar, that's different. Okay, so this is where the hard work occurs. So now convince your peer that the wording in the textual evidence, that is the textual evidence that you provided at step 3B, at that point in your paragraph construction, convince your peer that the wording in the textual evidence really does show that there is a way in which your responses, that is your arguments, either compare, have something alike, have something the same, or similar in some way, and or different. Now, remember, you've got to be focused. Each paragraph will focus on one thing. So if you're going to start with the claim that it's something similar, then you're going to focus this part on, trying to convince your peer that the quoted evidence from step 3B really does show or could show that there is a similarity, even if you have to do a little bit of interpretation, read between the lines. And then, of course, you'll do this a second time where you talk about a difference or vice versa. In any case, you're really trying to convince. You're trying to, offer compelling reasoning discussion. Imagine I said, hey, your peer does not agree that there are any differences or anything the same. They don't even think it makes sense to compare your argument with theirs. And what if I said, I will pay you $1,000 if you can convince them, and they're really into logic and argument and evidence. Imagine I was going to give you $1,000. Imagine on top of that, I told the class, hey, whoever writes the best arguments for this exercise, the best paragraphs, I'm going to give you $1,000 bonus. Well, you get a sense of, right, what I want you to put into this, okay? So you are explaining and elaborating on how the ideas expressed in your pieces of evidence justify a given claim of comparison and or contrast. This explanation, elaboration, defense requires at least 3 statements for each claim of comparison or contrast. So again, remember, for a similarity or difference, remember each paragraph has to focus on either a difference or a similarity. Don't discuss both a similarity and a difference. No matter what you quote, chances are that those 2 sets of quotes could be used to argue for a similarity, but also for a difference. So nobody said exactly the same thing, otherwise you copied each other or copied someone else. So just keep that in mind. You can see 2 statements and you can decide you're going to focus on a similarity within that or a difference within that. Okay, so continuing on, I say that at least 3 sentences. So this is in addition to the sentences that you construct for 3A and 3B, those steps. Keep in mind that we're talking about task 3A. So this isn't task 3A, task 3B. This is step 3A, step 3B, step 3C of task 3. Now that said, keep in mind that that means that by the time you get to this part, you should be constructing either your 3rd or 4th sentence. If you're taking my recommendation to use a separate sentence to introduce each piece of quoted evidence from the respective arguments, well, then that would mean that you're starting with your 4th sentence by the time you get to here. So an answer that has a chance of getting at least a C or a B is going to have a total of at least 6 sentences. Do not write more than 8 or 9 sentences, maybe 10 if you feel like you really want to go there for a given paragraph. Okay, so again, this is where most of this occurs. Now, another mistake that students sometimes make here is that they do not unpack the statements enough. So one thing you can do is you really want to think about what all can I pull out of each quote? What can I really focus on? What was their angle? What was the focus? What was most important to them in the statement? What was most important to me in the statement? Say something about that. Is there a word that your peer used that is the same word that you used. Did you use them in the same way? Well, if you're focusing on the similarity, just stop and say, well, we used the same word, but we used it differently. I'll talk about that in the differences, maybe paragraph. But then you can say, you can talk about like, well, I feel like these ideas that we were expressing, we both use the same word. And then you can talk about how they use the word in their response and how you use the word in your response. So you could do that. So even if when you're talking about a similarity, there is also a difference, if your main point is to show a similarity and then elaborate on it a little bit, it would be okay if there's a little bit of difference in your paragraph. It's just that the focus should be on the similarity. So you could say, we both use this word. You use it to defend your conclusion that, I use it to defend, I use it in my reasoning to defend my conclusion, support, whatever. And then you could say, you use it in connection with, I use it in connection with. Overall, this shows that we're both considering. It's just stuff like that. I'm just kind of starting to give you an idea of the language that you can use. So, do I want to say anything else? I don't think so. You will get some examples to see this more in depth. The examples will not be available until probably Tuesday or Wednesday, because I am having to redo this a little bit since I changed the order of the curriculum, and I have less time to do so in a summer class. In the meantime, if you're waiting for the examples, if the peer threads are already up, if you already see Task 3C, you should go ahead and read your peer threads. Look for peer threads that you think will give you a lot of food for thought, a lot of to work with. Those who start this sooner have a better chance of getting or claiming answers that are more usable in some way. So don't forget to watch the other video that goes with Task 3A. Very important.